Hello, everybody. Tracy Mrs. JDog Flanagan with you here today. I'm the co-founder and senior vice president at JDog Brands. Welcome back to another exciting episode of Tactical Treasures podcast, sponsored by the JDog Foundation. Our podcast gives veterans, mil spouses, active duty members, military family members, and patriotic military supporters a voice in the veteran space to speak about their service, how they're affecting their communities post-service, and they share with me a tactical treasure that has shaped their journey in their military career, business, or life. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Sam Peterson, who is a former Army EOD technician and draws from his own experiences with mental health challenges to develop programs to make a meaningful difference for those who have served. He is the co-founder of Mind Spa and the Patriot Power Up program, where his team has successfully treated hundreds of individuals using highly effective methods to address TBI, PTSD, depression, and anxiety. The data gathered from these efforts underscores the transformative impact of these innovative approaches, which are not only effective but life-changing. His unwavering belief in the power of community and support fuels his commitment to improving mental health care for veterans and creating lasting positive change. In addition to his work with Mind Spa and Patriot Power Up, Sam is the founder of Invictus Project, which is a nonprofit organization dedicated to providing critical financial assistance to veterans seeking mental health treatment. Hello, Sam. Welcome to the podcast, and thank you so much for your service to our country, sir.
Oh, thanks, Tracy. It's an honor to be here, and just happy to be here and help spread the message of more effective treatment for these issues that plague our community day in and day out.
Yes, I know. There's a lot to get to here, and I'm really excited for our discussion today. But before we get started with that, I would really love to know what inspired you to join the Army.
um, you know, it was actually trauma, if I'm being completely honest. So my father, before I was born, fell off a 3-story roof and landed on a bed of concrete. The only thing that saved his life was the wooden step at the bottom that his head hit.
Oh
And
my
I grew
gosh.
up in kind of a broken home. If you've ever, been around someone who has a traumatic brain
Hmm.
injury, it can be really difficult for them to regulate their mood and their mental state.
Hmm.
So, had a pretty tumultuous childhood because of that. And I'm just really grateful that we were actually able, through the technologies that we've helped develop, to come back, what was it, 31 years later and actually heal his brain.
Wow.
So, when I was going through high school, it was okay, cool. I'm going to go to college. Ran out of money pretty quickly, and I walked into the recruiter. And after I took the ASVAB, they're like, "Hey, here are your options." The first one was military intelligence, and I was like, "Yeah, that your promo video was just a bunch of dudes sitting in a tent." And I was like, hard pass. Let's try the next one. And so the second video they showed me was like explosions, robots,
Oh,
bomb suit. And I was like,
oh
all right,
no.
cool, dude. I was like, you had me at robots. Let's go.
Oh God.
And the one thing they didn't tell me, they're like, oh yeah, and you'll get a $50,000 bonus. And I was like, oh,
Oh,
that
oh,
I like.
right.
Oh, I'm a young gun who just was a grocery bagger at Albertsons. Of course, I want 50 grand. What they didn't tell me is that you had to pass the most difficult academic school in the entire Department of Defense before
Oh
you get that
no.
money.
Oh wow.
Yeah, so white that was what got me there, getting out of my hometown and doing something exciting.
Oh my gosh. Well, that's exciting. Um, so is there a particular aspect or moment from your service that kind of stood out to be a positive impact on you?
I had a lot of positive points. The biggest one for me was it came from kind of the nature of EOD. We're a very, very small community, and as you can imagine, growing up in a broken home and without a lot of good male role models, like I was kind of a wild child who didn't know what being a man was
Mm,
and what that meant to just really honor your word, be stoic and dependable and provide value to people. Those weren't those were not values that were ingrained in me as a child. So one of the biggest things that I got out of the military was mentorship. My first team leader, he's now a captain in the Army, Captain Lawrence, just absolutely changed my life. He taught me how to be a man and took me under his wing and showed me what I needed to do, not just to have success in the military, but to have success as a human being. And that's something that, I take those lessons with me every day.
Wow, that's really amazing. Yeah, mentorship can be, really life changing. Now, so you were an EOD technician.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, bombs, robots, the whole nine yards. But I remember in a previous conversation that we had in scheduling this podcast that it's the highest rate of suicide. And I would love if you would talk to us a little bit about that. And is that kind of what led you to founding Patriot Power Up?
Yeah. So, just like you just said, EOD has one of the highest suicide rates in the entire Department of Defense. And the reason for that is that we are constantly exposed to traumatic blasts. We are inundated with traumatic brain injuries, just like an NFL player constantly getting hit every day. Even though they're wearing a helmet, your brain is floating around in your skull. It's
Hmm.
not really attached to anything.
Right.
And the inside of your skull is actually pretty spiny.
Hmm.
So when you constantly jar like this, or you're receiving a blast wave that goes through the brain, you are ripping and tearing tissues and causing a traumatic brain injury. And that the knock-on effects from that traumatic brain injury lead into a host of other mental health conditions. A lot of people don't know this either. The highest comorbidity with traumatic brain injury is major depressive disorder. So that leads to a lot of suicides.
Right. And is that just how the brain is being banged inside the skull, or is it hitting a certain area of the brain? Is that causes that particular problem, that depressive disorder?
So one of the main things that depression, anxiety, PTSD, and traumatic brain injuries all have in common is that they are highly inflammatory to the brain.
Mm,
And the brain is full of all these tiny little blood vessels that uh, it doesn't take a whole lot of inflammation to shunt off. When you shunt off a blood vessel, the cells on the other end of that inflammation can no longer receive blood flow. They can no longer receive the oxygen that those red blood cells are carrying. And that has a lot of negative effects on how your cells can make energy. They have to switch over from what's called cellular respiration. Think of this like burning natural gas. It's a pretty clean way to make energy. They
right.
have to
Okay.
switch over from that to what's called anaerobic glycolysis. It's a fermentation process. It's how cancer cells make energy. So imagine going from this really clean natural gas, solution for making energy over to like a dirty coal burning stove. It doesn't take too long for enough of these cells to be using this dirty way of making energy before the space around them is now full of toxic chemicals of detritus, really, that causes more inflammation, and it kills the cells around it, and it kills them slowly. So that's why we see individuals who have traumatic brain injuries, like they'll see a rise in functionality, and then they'll plateau, and you'll just see a slow decline until they eventually start to develop dementia like symptoms, and boop. And
Right.
that leads into another point, is like the cost of all of this. It's pretty insane. I don't know if you if you're familiar with the numbers on TBI, but just in the post 9/11 era alone up till now, there have been 463,000 traumatic brain injuries in our service
Oh
members.
my gosh. Wow. That's astronomical.
And the really scary thing is, not only have there been 463,000 traumatic brain injuries, but the likelihood of developing dementia from having a traumatic brain injury is increased by 60%.
Wow. That's unbelievable.
And then the cost too.
Yeah. Yeah. So So talk to me about what led you to. So Mind Spa and Patriot Power Up are working together, conjoined, so to
They're actually
speak.
separate.
Okay.
They're actually separate. They both use the same treatment protocol that we developed at Mind Spa.
Oh, okay.
Mind Spa is our outpatient clinic where we use the same therapeutics as Patriot Power Up. So we use a combination of ketamine infusion therapy, hyperbaric oxygen therapy, and transcranial magnetic stimulation, along with culturally competent therapy, so we can heal and rewire the brain simultaneously.
Okay. Oh, wow. That's amazing. So, how did this come about? How did you seem so knowledgeable about the brain?
Honestly, much like the reason I joined the army, it was because of pain. Um, I've lost a number of friends to suicide,
Right.
but the one that really got me on this path was actually right after I had kind of recovered from what I was going through, and that was the intervention of a few friends that saved my life. But directly after I started on the upswing myself using these alternative therapies. One of my mentors, I was the last guy to talk to him right before the Memorial Day weekend started in 2015. Walked out into his backyard and blew his head off with his 3-year-old kid in the house,
Oh
and
no.
yeah,
Oh my gosh.
and it not only did it floor me, but it made me incredibly angry because I had just been through the Army's mental health system, and
Hmm.
it's throw you pills and do talk therapy. And unfortunately, and this is something that I hope everybody understands, that you cannot medicate your way out of a traumatic brain injury. It is a hypoxic injury to the brain. And until you affect that underlying neurobiology, you're wasting the patient's time. They're on a fast track to get dementia.
Right.
Um,
And
yeah.
I actually I've heard that a lot of the medication that they put you on actually can make you have suicidal ideations or suicidal thoughts.
Oh
And
yeah. I
you're
mean,
trying to you're trying to prevent suicide. Wow.
yeah, absolutely. And one of the ways that you prevent suicide is you interact with the neurobiology of the injury. You have that hypoxic injury that's caused by this inflammation. How do we deal with that? Well, we downregulate inflammation in the system. That's one of the reasons that ketamine is such a powerful tool in treating traumatic brain injuries and PTSD, because it targets that inflammatory cascade. So we can take someone who's having, severe post-concussive migraines, they're having brain fog, they're having suicidal thoughts. We can do a couple of intravenous ketamine treatments, and all of a sudden, their symptomology, their symptoms that they're experiencing go from incredibly acute down to mild or potentially non-existent,
Right.
depending on the person.
So this, I think, kind of leads me right into my next question. So you've been told by the medical community that you cannot heal the brain, but you say that's false. And
It's false.
so why? I would love to hear the reason why. Share with us.
It is so incredibly false, and we've got the data to show. Um, in order to fix this issue, this hypoxic issue that we've been talking about,
Mhm.
you have to do something different. Our lungs can only take in so much oxygen. You can only get so much to the brain. So how do we fix that? The main way that we get more oxygen in your system is through hyperbaric oxygen therapy. And if you, I'm sure you've heard about hyperbaric, from
Mhm.
all the grunt style
Mhm. Yeah.
folks. Um, yeah, I was just at the military influencer conference the other year. They had one in their booth.
Right.
Um, that is one of the only ways that we know how to get oxygen into the brain in higher volumes, because it hyperoxygenates your blood plasma. So instead of relying on, this red blood cell to carry oxygen to, the other side of a vein that's blocked off, we can now hyperoxygenate the liquid that it rides on. So we can bathe the brain in oxygen, which allows your cells to create more energy. When you allow your cells to create more energy, they can start the healing process and start to clean out all of the detritus that is built up over time.
Hello, viewers and listeners. I would like to introduce you to the JDog Foundation, which is a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to the prevention of veteran suicide and the healing of veterans' mental health. 100% of all proceeds received by the JDog Foundation goes directly to several foundations focused on the mission of saving veterans' lives. Each partner is hand-selected by our executive director, Jerry Flanagan, with input from the assistant director, Tracy Flanagan, and the JDog Foundation board members. Our foundation's motto: saving lives, one veteran at a time. Go to jdogfoundation.org to take a look at everything that we're doing there and the organizations that we're partnered with. You can also donate, and there's also a support line if you're in need of help. Thanks. Check us out. jdogfoundation.org. That's amazing. So, like, if that is working for you, is this something that's lifelong, hypo barrier oxygen? Is that something that you have to do? Is it so many sessions, or talk to me about how all the modalities work?
So Israel is actually quite a bit farther ahead of us on this research. And what they've found is typically the treatment zone for TBI is anywhere from 1.5 atmospheres absolute to 2. That's 1.5 to 2 times atmospheric pressure at sea level. And you need to, go to that pressure while you're breathing concentrated oxygen for at the very least 40 treatments. But where we see the long-term gains that are sustainable, 60 to 80 treatments,
Okay.
and those are hour-long sessions. So it's about 90 minutes in and out of the clinic if you're getting it at a place like Mind Spa. That's just with dive time, and if you have to change to go into the chamber. So it's doable. It does take a decent amount of time to heal the brain, and the longer that you wait to get treatment, the longer it takes to heal the
Right.
injury.
Okay. That makes
There's another
sense.
thing like there's actually a principle called the golden hour of TBI. So the closer that you get to that injury, the faster you can get someone into a hyperbaric chamber, the less time it takes for the body to recover.
Mm. Okay. Wow, that's amazing. Explain to me the treatment protocol that you've developed,
Mhm.
and obviously the results are amazing. I can't wait to
Yeah,
hear.
yeah. So when someone comes in and does our entire treatment protocol, here's what it looks like. So first, they get an assessment. We give them an assessment with a psychologist or a psychiatrist, depending on which program they're going to. Let's just talk about Mind Spa, the outpatient, because I think that's a little more accessible for people
Mhm.
depending on where they're at in their journey. But they come in, they get assessed by a psychiatric provider. We make sure there's no contraindications for them, that there's nothing that's going to interfere with their treatment. And then what we like to do, as long as, again, no contraindications, is put them on a series of ketamine treatments. So they get 4 to 6 ketamine treatments. What that does is it immediately downregulates inflammation in the brain, so we can immediately provide relief from those symptoms. It also upregulates neuroplasticity. So TBI is very, very rarely there in the body alone. And in the brain alone. There's typically some comorbid depression. PTSD is a very common companion with traumatic brain injury, and potentially some anxiety. So we want to treat those all simultaneously. So we upregulate that neuroplasticity. The individual is also in therapy during that time. So we're helping to make these rewiring changes for those other mental health conditions simultaneously. And then we're putting them into the hyperbaric chamber at least once a day for that 60-minute time frame. That, again, physically downregulates that inflammation and also increases the amount of oxygen that your body has in its blood plasma. So we're increasing the amount of energy that your cells can make, because anytime we're healing and rewiring the brain, it's an incredibly energy intensive process, and it takes some time. The last piece that we use is the last treatment that we use is called transcranial magnetic stimulation. Now, this is something that a lot of people probably haven't heard of. So TMS is a technology that's been around since the late 80s. It really came into the fold in the early to mid 2000s, and it is an FDA approved treatment for depression with about a 75% response rate. So 75% of people will respond positively to
Mm-hmm.
TMS. What TMS is, it's an MRI coil that we place on the head, and that MRI coil creates a magnetic field under the surface of the scalp. That magnetic field basically tricks your neurons into clustering more densely in a network where we're treating. So when we're treating depression, we're treating the prefrontal cortex, the actually the left dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, and increasing the amount of neurons that are clustered there. And what that does, just fundamentally at a very high level, is it gives you a dimmer switch for your symptoms. So instead of getting thrown into the depression hole or just sucked into a panic attack, you have the cognitive capacity to go, okay, there's my trigger. I'm not gonna step in the hole. I'm gonna, make a lateral move, and I don't need to interact with that stimuli in the same way. It gives you more control.
Okay.
And when you combine all these things together, people get better. Not only do they get better faster, but they stay better longer. And we see a drastic reduction in symptomology within 14 to 17 days.
Wow.
And then, within about 21, we're looking at zeros across the board for depression, anxiety, and PTSD
That's
within the
amazing.
patient.
So I know we've talked a lot about TBI, but what if, somebody's just, can they come to you if they don't have TBI but just have PTSD or
Mhm.
anxiety or depression, but no necessarily a traumatic brain injury? And how is that treatment? Is it a little bit different?
Yeah, so we tailor our treatments to whatever the patient needs. Not everybody needs the whole suite of treatments.
Hmm.
We do treat PTSD, depression, anxiety, and TBI separately if we need to. But yeah, we're especially on the outpatient side, we're in network with all
Hmm.
the major insurance carriers. TMS is covered by all the major insurance
Oh, wow.
carriers, and we also do a lot of work with emergency medical personnel like ambulance drivers, paramedics, dispatch workers, police, fire, and we've got a number of programs that can also help subsidize the cost of those treatments that are not covered by insurance. Because typically, IV ketamine is not covered by insurance yet, but we're working with insurance carriers to increase coverage on that so we can bring the costs down.
Okay, great. So is this something that, like, let's say I'm here in Pennsylvania. Can I, do I travel to you, or how does it work?
Yeah, so right now our outpatient clinic is in Denver.
Mhm.
We have plans to expand, but if veterans are interested in this treatment protocol, Patriot Power Up is also an option up in Idaho, and again uses the same treatment protocol, but in an inpatient format. So there's a lot more therapy. There's a lot more group work. It's meant for someone who needs that more intensive kind of environment.
Okay.
So yeah, the in order to engage with our entire protocol, all in one place, you'd have to come to us. But the cool thing is, and this is something people really need to know, is that there is a ketamine clinic in just about every single major city, at least one, if not three or four.
Okay.
Hyperbaric, most often in major cities, there will be at least one place. There's also options to rent these things and stick them in your home. Now it's a chamber that goes down to less pressure, but this is something that you literally could stick in a room this size and do every day.
Okay. And do you help people with getting other types of resources if they can't travel to you?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
I really don't care if someone comes to my program. I just want less veteran suicides.
Yeah.
This is, I tell this to a lot of the providers we work with. There are enough sick people for everybody. We don't need to be in
Yeah,
competition.
that's
We need to help
unfortunate.
people get better.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. But I hear you. What is the Invictus Project, the nonprofit that you've also created? Could you talk to me a
Yeah.
little bit
So
about that?
Yeah, so the Invictus Project was kind of my first step into mental
Mm,
health, and we were using Invictus to raise money for veterans to get more effective treatment for traumatic brain injuries. Um, since we've been able to get this into like the VA community care program and increase the access to care through insurance companies, Invictus has kind of taken a back seat, but we're revving the nonprofit back up now to assist in paying for these services that are traditionally cash pay, and we're getting into the psychedelic medicine space as well. Because here in Colorado, we can use psilocybin in a clinical setting legally. There's still a little bit of work on the regulatory framework that
mhm.
needs to happen, but these avenues are now opening up, and we want to make sure that even if a veteran, or even a veteran spouse doesn't have the ability to pay for this stuff,
Mhm.
that we have a safety net.
I see. That's great. Yeah. Um, okay, this has been amazing. You're so knowledgeable, and I love what you're doing. I think it's amazing that you're able to get these results. And your father, where you said you were able to cure him, really?
Yeah. So,
Wow.
um, I during the beginning stage of this, I also helped develop an intranasal stem cell protocol.
Oh, okay.
So another thing that hyperbaric oxygen therapy does is it increases your body's natural stem cell production. So we can get your stem cell production up to about 8 times its normal level. And then we can take those stem cells out of your blood, concentrate them, and then stick them into your brain via your nose. So we can actually bathe the brain in growth factors in the stem cells. And when you are able to put those kind of resources directly at the site of injury, the brain recovers very, very fast. This is
Wow.
this is a procedure. It shouldn't. It sounds a little space agey, but it's literally something that doctors do all the time. Like if you go get
Wow.
like an orthopedic surgery, platelet rich plasma is used to help in recovery. We're just taking that same concept and just sticking it into your brain.
Wow.
And the great thing is, it's safe because it's your own cells. It's your own cellular energy that's helping to heal you.
Wow. That's
And
amazing.
we did that for my dad. And
Wow.
another cool thing, because Tracy, you got kids, right?
Yeah, I do.
Well, little known fact, because you are a genetic match for your children are actually little stem cell banks for you. Uh,
Yeah.
so when you're like, oh yeah, that's right, time to give mommy some value back.
Yeah. Well, my kids they're grown now. They're adults.
Oh no, that's perfect. So what we did with my dad, so while excuse me, while we were developing all this stuff, my dad called me and he's like, he was about 55 at the time, and this was back in 2018. And he's like, hey man, like, can you help me out? Like, I can feel that I'm starting to get dementia. I'm forgetting things. My temper's out of control. I can't operate. The brain fog's awful. And I went to the doctor I was working with, Dr. Hughes from TBI Therapy, and I was like, "Hey, man, is there anything we can do? Because like my dad's on Medicaid, like, and I'm talking to a doctor in Aspen. It's not exactly lowest cost rents in the U.S." And he's like, "Oh yeah." So what we did was we upregulated my stem cell production. So I went into the hyperbaric chamber for about 20 sessions. We got my stem cell production really ramped up, and then we took my stem cells and stuck them into my dad's brain and his spine. And I can tell you that it takes a little while for the proliferation of the cells for that inflammation to really get down regulated. But after 6 weeks, it was a new dude.
Oh my
Like it was like
gosh.
someone turned on the emotional intelligence light. And even growing up, like my dad had the emotional intelligence of a 15-year-old. He used to put my head through a wall if he didn't like what I had to say. And he went from that to, yeah, I don't get angry anymore
Wow.
in a very, very short period of
That's
time.
amazing. That is absolutely amazing. Ugh, okay. We could talk about this all day. This is
Oh yeah.
incredible. But it's Tactical Treasures podcast. Sam, I have to ask you, what is your tactical treasure?
You know, My tactical treasure and the treasure that I'd like to share with anybody listening to this is if you're struggling or if you have a loved one who's struggling, you don't have to feel this way all the time. This thing that is going on in your body and your brain is absolutely treatable. We literally have the technology right now. It exists probably right around the corner from where you live, and it's incredibly accessible. Um, that's the treasure that I have to give. If you're someone who's struggling, like this stuff exists and you probably have access to it either through a nonprofit or through some of the programs that we have. Um, and if you'd like more information, we I'm sure we'll have the websites in the show notes. You can always hit me on LinkedIn, Sam J. Peterson. I'm very responsive. Um, and yeah, that's the treasure that I have to share with your viewers.
That's awesome. So that kind of segues right in. Any other words of advice you might have for somebody struggling?
Yeah, don't wait to get help.
Yeah,
Don't So often in the veteran community, we have this idea that if I am getting treated, I'm taking resources away from someone else. That's not the case. There's a ton of resources out there for this, and you owe it to the people around you to be a better version of yourself. So if you're struggling with this stuff, if you're struggling with depression, anxiety, PTSD, or a traumatic brain injury, quit screwing around. You owe it to yourself and your family to get help.
great words of advice. I love it. Perfect. That's amazing. So, all right. So I think before you go, just tell us again. So, how can people connect with you? Is LinkedIn the best way?
Yeah, LinkedIn, Sam J. Peterson on LinkedIn, um, mindspadenver.com or patriotpowerup.com. You know, all these avenues we're very responsive on.
Okay. That's awesome. Thank you for that. We'll be sure to get the word out. Sam, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your vast knowledge of all these incredible treatments that are available to people, suffering with brain injury, TBI, and PTSD long term. It's really been amazing, everything that you've shared. I really appreciate it. Thank you for your vulnerability too and sharing your story.
No, yeah, anytime, Tracy. I think it's really important that all of us kind of get off our high horse, put our egos aside, and are honest about the kind of pain we're in. Because if you're suffering, you're not alone. There's so many other people in the same shoes as you that need the hand up that you need.
Right, right. Well said, sir. Well said. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing all that you did. I really appreciate it. Hello, viewers and listeners. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Tactical Treasures Podcast. We've just finished up a very enlightening and amazing conversation with Sam Peterson, who is a former Army EOD technician. He is now the co-founder of Mind Spa and the Patriot Power Up program, which is dedicated to providing comprehensive care that addresses the underlying causes of mental disorders through acute, accurate diagnosis and evidence-based treatment. Unfortunately, traditional inpatient mental health programs often fail to diagnose accurately, resulting in ineffective treatment and a high risk of symptom reoccurrence. Patriot Power Up's approach ensures that each individual's condition is correctly identified before treatment begins, resulting in higher rates of successful recovery. Utilizing cutting edge technologies, they create a long term vision for the care of their patients. Patriot Power Up understands the urgency of mental health issues among veterans and are committed to improving their well being, preventing suicidality, and ensuring that they receive the quality care they both need and deserve. To learn more, go to mindspadenver.com. Again, thank you for tuning in. Don't forget you can find our Tactical Treasures podcast on all your favorite podcast platforms, including Vet TV, American Grit, and our dedicated YouTube channel. We are now airing on Reese Across America Radio on Wednesdays at 5 p.m. Eastern. And if you miss that, be sure to join us on Saturday at 10 a.m. Eastern for the encore. You can also find Reese Across America Radio on the iHeartRadio app, the Odyssey app, and the TuneIn app. Again, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you again on another podcast real soon. Bye-bye now.